The air was thick with the weight of unspoken words as Ethan stared at the lake, its surface catching the last embers of a New York sunset. He could feel Lucas beside him, his younger brother's breath uneven, like he was holding a storm inside. This was no ordinary evening. It was the kind that could unravel a lifetime. Ethan, 35, had always been the steady one, the anchor for their fractured family in Rochester. With his broad shoulders and calloused hands from years of carpentry, he carried the look of a man who'd weathered more than just upstate winters. Lucas, 22, was different. Slight, with bright blue eyes that seemed to hold both fear and defiance. A college kid who'd come home for the weekend with something to say. They sat on the creaking dock of Lake Ontario, a place they'd fished as boys, now heavy with a conversation neither had planned. "I need to tell you something," Lucas said, his voice barely above the lapping waves. His fingers fidgeted with the hem of his sweater, betraying the calm he tried to project. Ethan turned, his hazel eyes narrowing, sensing the gravity in his brother's tone. "Spit it out, Luke," Ethan said, softer than he meant to. He wasn't ready for what came next. "I'm gay," Lucas said, the words tumbling out like stones into the still water. "I've known for years, but I couldn't keep it from you anymore." Ethan froze. The world seemed to tilt, not because of Lucas's confession, but because it dragged Ethan back to a part of himself he'd buried long ago. 20 years earlier, at 15, Ethan had sat in a cold church basement in Syracuse, surrounded by strangers who promised to fix him. Conversion therapy, they called it, 2 years of shame disguised as salvation. He'd told himself he'd overcome it, that he'd moved on, built a life with his wife, Clara, and their daughter, Mia. But now, Lucas's words cracked open a vault Ethan had sealed shut. "You're what?" Ethan's voice was hoarse, not from anger but from the ghosts stirring inside him. He looked at Lucas, seeing not just his brother but a mirror of his younger self. Scared, defiant, desperate to be seen. "I'm gay, Ethan," Lucas repeated, his voice steadier now, though his eyes searched Ethan's face for a reaction. "I've been with someone. His name's Caleb. I love him." Ethan's jaw tightened. Caleb. A name, a person, a reality he hadn't prepared for. He wanted to say something supportive, to be the brother Lucas needed, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, memories flooded back. The pastor's stern voice, the pamphlets about purity, the nights he'd prayed to be someone else. He'd never told Lucas about that part of his life. He'd never told anyone. The silence stretched, heavy and sharp. Lucas shifted, his sneakers scuffing the dock. "Say something, man. Please." Ethan rubbed his hands together, the rough skin grounding him. I need a minute," he managed, his voice low. He wasn't rejecting Lucas, he couldn't. But the confession had ripped open a wound he thought had scarred over. How could he explain that he wasn't just processing Lucas's truth, but confronting his own? The lake reflected the fading light, a mirror to their unease. Ethan thought of Clara, waiting at home with Mia, oblivious to the storm brewing here. He thought of the man he'd been at Lucas's age, the one who'd knelt in that basement, begging to be normal. And now Lucas was watching him, waiting for acceptance or rejection. "I'm not mad," Ethan said finally, his voice cracking. I've got my own stuff, Luke. Stuff I never told you." Lucas's brow furrowed, confusion mixing with hope. "What do you mean?" Ethan took a deep breath, the cold air biting his lungs. "Let's walk," he said, standing. "There's a lot you don't know about me." They left the dock, the gravel crunching under their boots as they headed toward the trail that looped around the lake. The night was closing in, and Ethan knew this was only the beginning. Lucas's coming out wasn't just a revelation, it was a reckoning for them both. As they walked, Ethan's mind raced. How could he tell Lucas about the years he'd spent trying to erase his own attraction to men? How could he admit that the brother Lucas looked up to had once hated himself for the same truth Lucas was now embracing? The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. This conversation would change them forever. Lucas kept pace, his hands stuffed in his pockets, stealing glances at Ethan. "You're freaking me out," he said, half joking, but his voice trembled. "What's going on with you?" Ethan stopped, turning to face his brother under the shadow of a towering oak. "I wasn't always the guy you think I am," he said. "When I was a kid, I went through something I never wanted you to know about." Lucas's eyes widened, but he stayed quiet, waiting. Ethan felt the weight of the moment, the years of silence pressing down. He had to tell the truth, not just for Lucas, but for himself. "I was like you," Ethan said, the words tasting like ash. "I liked guys, and I thought it was wrong. So I let some people try to change me." Lucas's mouth parted. Shock etched across his face. "You what? Ethan, are you saying?" "I'm saying I've been where you are." Ethan cut in, his voice raw. "And I made choices I regret. I don't want you to go through what I did." The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the weight of Ethan's confession. Lucas stood frozen, processing the words. For the first time, the brothers saw each other clearly, not as protector and protected, but as two men bound by a shared, painful truth. The trail wound deeper into the woods, the lake now a distant shimmer behind them. Ethan's boots crunched against the fallen leaves, each step a reminder of the path he'd taken to bury his past. Lucas walked beside him, his silence louder than any question. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth, but it did little to ease the tension between them. "You liked guys?" Lucas finally asked, his voice small but insistent. "Like, for real? You're not just saying this to make me feel better." Ethan let out a bitter laugh, the sound swallowed by the trees. "I wish I was. Would have made my life a hell of a lot easier." He stopped walking, leaning against a weathered fence post, his hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets. "It started when I was 14. There was this guy, Nate, in my shop class. I didn't know what it meant at first, just that I couldn't stop thinking about him." Lucas's eyes were wide, his breath visible in the chilly air. "What happened?" Ethan's gaze dropped to the ground, his jaw tight. "I told Mom. Big mistake. She freaked out, dragged me to our pastor. Next thing I knew, I was in a church basement every Tuesday night, listening to people tell me I was broken. They called it reparative therapy. Said it'd make me right with God." Lucas flinched, his hands balling into fists. "That's messed up, Ethan. Why didn't you ever tell me?" "Because I was ashamed?" Ethan snapped, then softened, running a hand through his hair. "I thought I'd fixed it, you know? I met Clara in college, fell in love, built a life. I told myself it was over, that I was normal. I didn't want you looking at me like I was someone else." "But you are someone else," Lucas said, his voice sharp with frustration. "You're my brother, yeah, but you've been carrying this alone. And now you're telling me you went through hell because of who you are." Ethan's chest tightened. Lucas's words cut deeper than he'd expected. Not because they were cruel, but because they were true. "It wasn't just about me," he said. "I was trying to protect you. Growing up, you were always the sensitive one. I didn't want you to see me weak." Lucas shook his head, his eyes glistening. "Weak? Ethan, you're the strongest person I know. You raised me when Dad left. You kept Mom from falling apart. And now you're telling me you were fighting this too." Ethan looked away, the guilt twisting like a knife. He'd spent years shielding Lucas from their family's chaos, their father's abandonment, their mother's breakdowns, but he'd never considered that hiding his own truth might have hurt Lucas more. "Let's keep moving," Ethan said, pushing off the fence. He needed to move to keep the words from choking him. Lucas followed, his steps hesitant but determined. As they walked, Lucas's voice broke the silence. "So, what about Clara? Does she know?" Ethan's heart sank. Clara, with her warm laugh and steady presence, had been his anchor for a decade. They'd met at SUNY Geneseo, bonded over late-night coffee and shared dreams of a quiet life. She knew parts of his past, the therapy, the shame, but not the full weight of it. "She knows enough," Ethan said. "She knows I struggled, but I never told her how deep it went. I didn't want her to think I was less." Lucas stopped, grabbing Ethan's arm. "Less? Ethan, you're married to her. You have Mia. How could she think that?" Ethan pulled away, his voice low. "Because I'm not sure I believe it myself." The words hung between them, raw and unfiltered. Lucas's expression softened, a mix of pity and resolve. "You don't have to carry this alone anymore," he said. "I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." Ethan nodded, his throat tight. For the first time, he felt the weight of his secret lift, just a fraction. But the relief was fleeting, replaced by a new fear. What would this mean for his life with Clara? With Mia? Could he be honest with them without unraveling everything? They reached a clearing where the trail opened to a view of the lake, now cloaked in twilight. Lucas sat on a fallen log, patting the space beside him. Ethan hesitated, then joined him, their shoulders brushing. "Tell me about Caleb," Ethan said, surprising himself with the question. He needed to shift the focus to understand Lucas's world. Lucas's face lit up, a shy smile breaking through. "He's amazing. He's 23, a grad student at NYU. He's studying environmental science, wants to save the planet or something." He laughed, then grew serious. "He makes me feel like I can be myself. No hiding." Ethan envied that certainty, that freedom. "Sounds like a good guy," he said, meaning it. "You gonna bring him around?" Lucas's smile faltered. "I want to, but I was scared you'd, I don't know, disown me or something." Ethan's heart broke. "Never," he said fiercely. "You're my brother, Luke. I'd walk through fire for you." Lucas's eyes welled up, and he looked away, wiping his face with his sleeve. "Thanks," he whispered. I needed to hear that." They sat in silence, the lake a quiet witness to their bond. But Ethan's mind was far from calm. Lucas's courage had forced him to confront his own cowardice, his years of denial. He'd built a life on half-truths, and now, with Lucas's truth laid bare, Ethan knew he couldn't keep running from his own. Back at Ethan's house, the warmth of the living room felt like a stark contrast to the chill of the lake. Clara was in the kitchen, humming as she stirred a pot of chili, while Mia, their 7-year-old daughter, sprawled on the rug, coloring a picture of a dinosaur. The normalcy of it all made Ethan's chest ache. How could he bring his past into this perfect, fragile world? Lucas had gone upstairs to shower, giving Ethan a moment to process. He sank into the couch, staring at the framed photo on the mantel. Him, Clara, and Mia at a county fair, laughing under a Ferris wheel. He'd fought so hard to build this life, to be the man Clara deserved, the father Mia needed. But Lucas's confession had stirred something restless in him, a question he'd avoided for years. Was he truly happy, or just safe? Clara poked her head out from the kitchen, her auburn hair tied back, her green eyes bright. "You boys okay? You were gone a while." Ethan forced a smile. "Yeah, just catching up." He couldn't tell her yet. Not until he understood what it all meant. Dinner was quiet, the clink of spoons against bowls the only sound breaking the tension. Lucas kept his eyes on his plate, stealing glances at Ethan, who avoided his gaze. Mia chattered about school, oblivious to the undercurrent. Clara, though, sensed it. She reached for Ethan's hand under the table, her touch grounding him. After Mia was tucked in, Lucas lingered in the living room, fidgeting with his phone. "I'm heading back to the city tomorrow," he said. "Caleb's picking me up at the station. You want to meet him?" Ethan hesitated. Meeting Caleb would make this real, would force him to face the life Lucas was building. One Ethan had never allowed himself. "Maybe," he said. "Let me think on it." Lucas nodded, disappointment flickering in his eyes. "Okay, just let me know." That night, Ethan lay awake beside Clara, her steady breathing a reminder of the life he'd chosen. But his mind was with Lucas, with Caleb, with the boy he'd been at 15. He remembered Nate, the way his laugh had made Ethan's heart race, the way he'd hated himself for it. He'd pushed it all down, convinced himself it was a phase, a sin, a mistake. But now, seeing Lucas's courage, Ethan wondered if he'd made the wrong choice. The next morning, Ethan drove Lucas to the train station. The Rochester skyline loomed in the distance, gray and unyielding. Lucas clutched his backpack, his nerves palpable. "You sure you don't want to come?" he asked as they pulled into the parking lot. Ethan gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. "I'll meet him another time," he said. "Just be safe, okay?" Lucas nodded, then leaned over and hugged him, quick but fierce. "Thanks for listening," he said. "I mean it." As Lucas disappeared into the station, Ethan felt a pang of loss. He drove home, the weight of his past heavier than ever. When he walked through the door, Clara was waiting, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "We need to talk," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "You've been off since last night. What's going on?" Ethan's heart raced. He'd kept his secret from her for so long, but Lucas's truth had changed something in him. He couldn't keep lying, not to her, not to himself. "Sit down," he said, leading her to the couch. "There's something I need to tell you." Clara's eyes searched his, worry creasing her brow. Ethan took a deep breath, his hands trembling. "When I was younger, I wasn't honest with myself. Or with you." Her hand found his, steadying him. "Whatever it is, Ethan, we'll figure it out. Together." He told her everything, the attraction he'd felt, the therapy, the shame. He told her about Lucas, about the doc, about the memories that had resurfaced. Clara listened, her eyes glistening but her grip firm. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she squeezed his hand. "I love you," she said. "All of you. Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Ethan's throat tightened. "I was scared you'd leave." Clara shook her head, pulling him close. "I'm not going anywhere," she whispered. "But you need to figure out who you are, Ethan. For you, for Mia, for us." Her words were a lifeline but also a challenge. Ethan knew she was right. He couldn't keep running from himself. But what did that mean for their family, for the life they'd built? Weeks passed, and Ethan's world felt like it was on a fault line, trembling but not yet broken. He went through the motions, work, school runs, dinners with Clara, but the truth he'd shared with her lingered like an uninvited guest. Lucas texted often, sharing bits of his life with Caleb, inviting Ethan to visit them in New York City. Each message was a reminder of the choice Ethan faced, to confront his past or let it define him. One Saturday, Ethan found himself at the library, searching for books on identity, on bisexuality, on healing from trauma. The librarian, a kind woman named Rosa, noticed his hesitation and recommended a memoir by a man who'd survived conversion therapy. Ethan read it in one sitting, tears staining the pages. For the first time, he saw his pain reflected, not as weakness but as survival. He started therapy, too, a small step he hadn't expected to take. His therapist, Dr. Patel, was a calm presence, guiding him through the layers of shame and fear. "You don't have to choose between who you were and who you are," she said. "They're both you." At home, Clara was patient, giving him space but never pulling away. They talked more openly now about his fears about their future. Mia, sensing the shift, asked one night why Daddy seemed sad. Ethan knelt beside her, brushing her dark curls from her face. "I'm just figuring some things out, kiddo," he said. "But I love you more than anything." The turning point came when Lucas invited Ethan and Clara to a small gathering in Brooklyn. Caleb's birthday, a chance to meet the man who'd changed Lucas's life. Ethan hesitated, but Clara insisted. "You need to see him happy," she said. "And maybe you need to see what's possible for you." The drive to Brooklyn was quiet, Mia asleep in the back seat, Clara's hand resting on Ethan's knee. When they arrived at Caleb's apartment, a cozy walk-up filled with plants and books, Ethan felt a knot in his chest. Lucas greeted them at the door, his smile wide, his arm around a tall, lanky man with warm brown eyes and a crooked grin. "Caleb, this is my brother, Ethan," Lucas said, pride in his voice. "And Clara and Mia." Caleb shook Ethan's hand, his grip firm but kind. "Heard a lot about you," he said. "Thanks for coming." The evening was warm, filled with laughter and music. Caleb's friends, a diverse group of artists and activists, welcomed Ethan and Clara like family. Ethan watched Lucas and Caleb, the way they moved together, effortless and real. It stirred something in him, envy, but also hope. This was the life he'd denied himself, the freedom he'd been too afraid to claim. Later, on the rooftop, Ethan and Caleb found a quiet moment. "Lucas looks up to you," Caleb said, leaning against the railing. "He was terrified to tell you, but he said you were his rock." Ethan's throat tightened. "I don't feel like a rock. I feel like I'm falling apart." Caleb nodded, his gaze steady. "You're not. You're just rebuilding. Lucas told me a little about what you went through. That's heavy, man. But you're here. That's what matters." Ethan looked out at the city skyline, the lights blurring through unshed tears. "I don't know who I am anymore," he admitted. "You don't have to know," Caleb said. "Just keep showing up." Those words stayed with Ethan, a beacon in the fog. When they returned home, he felt lighter, not because he had answers, but because he'd seen a glimpse of what honesty could look like. Months later, spring bloomed in Rochester, the lake sparkling under a clear sky. Ethan stood on the same dock where Lucas had come out to him, but this time he wasn't alone. Clara stood beside him, her hand in his, while Mia skipped stones nearby, her laughter echoing. Lucas and Caleb were visiting, their presence a reminder of how far they'd all come. Ethan had continued therapy, peeling back the layers of his past. He'd begun to identify as bisexual, a word that felt both foreign and right. He and Clara had navigated tough conversations, redefining their marriage with honesty and love. They weren't perfect, but they were together, stronger for it. Lucas, now more confident, had introduced Caleb to their mother, who'd surprised them with tentative acceptance. The family was healing, slowly, imperfectly, but with intention. As the sun dipped low, Ethan turned to Lucas, who was tossing pebbles into the water with Caleb. "You did this?" Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. "You coming out, it forced me to face myself. I'm proud of you, Luke." Lucas grinned, nudging Caleb. "Told you he's sappy." Caleb laughed, but his eyes were warm. "He's not wrong, though. You're kind of a hero." Ethan shook his head, embarrassed but grateful. He looked at his family, Clara, Mia, Lucas, Caleb, and felt a peace he hadn't known was possible. He hadn't erased his past, but he'd made room for it, alongside the man he was becoming. The lake stretched before them, its surface a canvas of light and shadow. Ethan took a deep breath, the air clean and full of promise. He didn't have all the answers, but he had this moment, this family, this truth. And for now, that was enough.